What up, Marsh Pod? We're recording this Sunday afternoon. A very exciting week of college basketball. A lot of big wins over the last week. I said yesterday or last week that I wasn't going to deep dive. We deep dove into every single conference over the weekend. By the way, guest host in the building today. He's now out of the building today. But want to dive into Kansas because last couple weeks we're starting to see these teams being a little bit more consistent. Kansas chief among them with their big win over Texas, doing a good job to move them into the top spot in the Big 12 for now as they try to lock up one of the top two spots. But the interesting part of this is anytime any team is playing good, I always like to look at it and say, why? What's different? What's different about this team now than it was before, right? We dove into Miami. What's different about that team is their defense. They slowed the pace down. Without Kevon Jackson, it was a team that they were much less reliant on trying to play high-paced basketball. And Kansas, I wanted to look at and figure out what are they doing differently right now that's made them a better basketball team? Why are they 11-1 now when they were 18-6 before? And it comes down to a couple things. First, offensively. Now, their scoring has dropped back about 2 points per game. Not really enough to warrant a concern level from a, well, they're not getting it done perspective. That's really not a big deal. 2 points is 2 points. But what's really different is their defense, right? Nearly 10 points better per game. And it's not just a matter of they're more locked in on defense, but really, in the grand scheme of things, it's a team that's more consistent. Their schedule really hasn't gotten much harder than it was earlier in the season. Yes, they had, maybe you could argue, some tougher games, right? They had to play Mississippi State, Virginia Tech, Louisville, Georgia Tech. They went 2-2 in those games. They had to play Kansas. They beat them. So the schedule early on, when you look at their 6 losses, it wasn't that they were getting ramshackled like a team like Virginia Tech was or has been against good opponents. It's just they weren't consistent enough day in and day out, and particularly consistent enough on the defensive end. Now, I am a long-term proponent of the fact that you cannot be a basketball team that relies heavily on the offensive end and the offensive end only. I don't think that should be breaking news to anyone. That's my take, and I truthfully don't think it's a hard take or a hot take. It's why Iowa, regardless of what Lamarian Sherwood comes back and looks like, I don't know that I buy them too much because their defense isn't consistent enough to get stops. Their defense has not been a good team night in and night out. They rely on just overwhelming you offensively and getting it done that way. That's not really a recipe for success, especially when you look at like Kansas when they were averaging before the run when they were 8-6, they were averaging 78 points for 75.5 against. This time, in the last 12 games, 76.5 points for, 66 points against. So they have become more consistent. The talent level that they've played, maybe it's gotten a touch easier, right? The Big 12 is really 4 teams. It's Kansas, it's Texas, who they beat. It's Dayton, who they beat. And it's Kansas State and Texas Tech. Texas Tech being a team that hasn't really played well in non-conference play. The only loss there is Kansas State. Right, so they've been exceptionally consistent ever since the beginning of December on the defensive side of the ball. And that's what's going to change any team. That's what's going to change this Kansas team from being really good to being great and a potential title contender. It's why they are where they are right now in the top 25, because they've gotten more consistent. But it's not just defensively. There are only 2 teams in the entire country that have 2 players on their roster that are averaging at least 15 points per game. Virginia Tech and Kansas. Now, the irony of that is I have long been a non-believer in Virginia Tech, and I will again say expecting them to lose in the first round of Hoopsteria is a little bit much for me, but I'm just not a big believer in Virginia Tech. So to me, it was ironic that there's 2 teams. Now, there's some other fringe ones, right? Kentucky's pretty close. Michigan's pretty close. And there's one other, St. John's, but there's another one beyond that where you've got 2 guys that are right there. UCLA, that's the third one. UCLA is pretty close with 2 guys averaging 15 plus. But close, no cigar, almost only counts as horseshoes and hand grenades. There's only 2 teams that actually fit the bill of 15 plus point per game scores on their roster. It's Travion Novick and Newly Cox in Virginia Tech, and it's Naz Hall and Jermaine McLemore in in Kansas. Now, I said this last week on SimWorld Today. We're going to get close to having to have the conversation about where does Nas Hall rank in terms of freshmen in college basketball. Where does he rank? Because he's not outside the top 5 right now. Because he has been playing, and he's a National Player of the Week this past week. He has been playing out of his gosh darn mind. He's averaging 16 points per game. He shoots 41% on legitimate volume, 35 made threes. He's a 50-40. He is a point and a half away from being a 50-40-90 scorer. That's not easy to accomplish. And Nas Hall's doing it. And we could talk about Arthur Lattimore. We could talk about Cooper Flagg. I think there is a Justin Bell on that list, D'Angelo Jordan. Those are the folks that we've considered top 4. Nas Hall is in that group, and he might be better than some of them. The only guy I'm not taking him over definitively right now is Cooper Flagg. And I think there's a very real case to be made that he goes over a couple of the other guys because Nas Hall has completely changed the outlook of this team. This was not a group that was playing consistently around Madison Miles. And we've seen what happens with basketball teams that have one really good player and struggling supporting cast. They're 500 basketball teams, right? They hover around 500. They win some games. They don't blow everybody out. They're UNLV, right? Nat Hawkins is awesome, but Jarrell Beauchamp hasn't really lived up to the billing, right? Gonzaga, Caden Shipp is fantastic, but the rest of this roster hasn't really matched the output that we'd expect. That was Kansas until Nas Hall turned into the best point guard, and he's at 6'6". I mean, he's quickly becoming a wing, right? If you want him at the point guard, we're talking Lonzo Ball type of dynamicism on the outside there. He's a 2 guard who could potentially be a 3 at the next level. He has emerged from a wide group of teams that we didn't know about as a potential freshman to, I think, next season, Nas Hall is a top 5 pick. That's what he has changed. And not only has it changed his draft stock, it has made Kansas into a very, not only just fringe, this is a team that it's on the short list now. Again, we talk about who's in that group of teams that can win a championship. Kansas is in that group right now. There was a time where we didn't think that. There was a time when they were sitting outside of the top 25. Kansas has changed that. And they've changed that because they're playing consistently. Now, Bill Self said at the beginning of the season, this was one of the deepest teams he's ever coached. We knew they had talent. We knew that Madison Miles was the type of tentpole guy coming off a fantastic freshman season that got this team into the quad. He went from being a really good piece and then a bunch of other pieces around it to Nas Hall's changing all of that. He has completely changed the equation. He has made this team a better group. So they've gotten consistent. They've gotten a legitimate number 2, maybe even a number 1A, depending on, do you like a 6'6" guard who can light it up from deep, or do you like a 6'9" slashing forward? Personally, I take the wing. I'll take the wing in Nas Hall. That's what has changed for this group. So not only, yes, they were one of the deepest teams last season, or what Bill Self claimed to be this season. Nas Hall has not only made them deeper overall, but he's made them deeper at the top. And when you look at the top teams in the country right now, that's the difference between the ones that are sitting in the top 5, in the top 6, in the top 7. I think it's 7 legitimate teams right now that can win a national championship, and that big group behind them that are just trying to pick up the slack. And if they can find a way into a national championship, it's because one of those top 7 teams fell out along the way. Kansas is rolling. Kansas is legitimate. Nas Hall could be one of the best freshmen and best sophomores next season in all of college basketball.